Hello, fellow travelers. This is Grotnip speaking, welcoming you back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. This week I had prepared a unit focus piece on Irjavik and coal for all of you, but then Corvus Belli decided it was time to drop the first FAQ document for Warcrow, so I chose to take a look at the document in this week's video instead, and we will be pushing back the Irjavik piece at least a week for now. So why are we here and what are we going to be doing today? As already stated, Corvus Belli has finally decided to release the long-awaited first FAQ and Warcrow update document. I was debating whether doing a video this early on, less than a week after the release, would constitute a hot take, a thing that I more or less promised not to take. But then again, I decided that this is something that's probably on the lips of all the Warcrow players out there, and for those who aren't all that plugged into the community but for some reason like to watch my videos, this is a way of keeping up with what's what going forward. I also have touched many of the things that this FAQ goes over in my previous videos. In many instances I have said this is pending FAQ, we don't know how this works, or I suppose this is a typo and it should work like this. And there are also things that I personally have gotten wrong in the light of this FAQ document. So I thought it was important to take a look at it head on and highlight the things that I have gotten wrong in my previous videos. I'm not going to be going back and correcting all that stuff, it would take too much work, but if and when you watch those videos, come back to this FAQ and check if I got anything wrong that I have now done my best to correct. I have reformatted the questions somewhat so that those that are thematically close to one another are usually following each other in my presentation, but mostly we will be going through in the order that the document gives them in. I've, however, chosen to take a look at the unit focused stuff mostly first, and then we get to more of the rules stuff and so forth. And obviously we'll be starting with the Northern Tribes specific stuff, since that's what's on our mind and close to our hearts here in the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. Please do remember that what follows are just my personal takes on the matter, and as we are going to be seeing some of the wordings used are clearly made by people who don't speak English as their first language either, and even in some of these clarifications there is room for some interpretation. So forgive me if I get anything wrong, and you can also always let me know if you disagree with something I have said below in the comments to this video. And if I at any point and when at some points I go, well, this is how this reads in the rules, or I never thought to play this of any other way, take it to mean that I am a mere simple Lindworm traveler and not the greatest intelligent out there. So if you were one of the people who was struggling with some of the things, or who asked the questions that I'm going like, I don't get why this was asked, don't take it personally. Take it to mean that I am but a limited, humble orc, and that's the reason I don't get all of this. But with the preamble aside, let's get to the meat and potatoes and ask some questions, perform some updates, and see where that leads us. Okay, first things first. Corvus Belli has now added as an update the skill tag permanent to the game. And this is the most broad way that I think any of us could have expected or hoped permanent to work. As from here on out, permanent skills are always in effect, whether the character that has them is on the battlefield, not yet deployed, for example, because of scout or ambush, has joined a unit, or indeed have even been already destroyed. This permanent tag seems to be what they had in mind when they wrote the War Alliance rule, even though the models in question don't actually have the permanent tag with them. What this clarification, or rather an update to be precise, means is that somebody like the Dark Master with their sharp intuition ability becomes extremely powerful, since these passive skills that are accompanied by the permanent tag now become permanent upgrades to the company that's fielding those models. So a Northern Tribes company accompanied by a Dark Master will always have access to sharp intuition, whether you still have your Dark Master in reserve waiting for the right time to strike, whether they are on the battlefield, or indeed whether they have already been wiped out. And personally, as a Northern Tribes player, I really could not have hoped for a better update to how permanent works. And if I wasn't bringing the Dark Master into every game already, I sure would after this, since the hegemony of Embersic and in a mirror match the other Northern Tribes player has access to some really important scout and or ambush pieces already, and with the Sienna and Elves coming up next, I can only imagine that the number of such models is going to increase. So if you had bought stocks of Dark Master previous to this FAQ, you should be making off like bandits right now. Then we get to two quite publicly discussed typos involving Northern Tribes characters, and in the case of both of these, what CB has done has actually managed to surprise me. First up is my favorite high command character, the Wrathmane. As we can see from the card, Corvus Belli provided card on the left there, the Wrathmane's push modifiers automatic solid special symbol does not match the hollow special symbol switch that he has, and for the longest time the theory was that the symbol on the push modifier is wrong and it should actually be a hollow special. But what actually ends up happening as per this update is that the switch trigger is actually wrong. This not only achieves the same effect as to make the infliction of the vulnerable state automatic when the Wrathmane pushes for extra performance, but it also means that the likelihood of triggering this switch with a standard attack by the Wrathmane becomes a way more likely endeavor than when compared to the hollow special symbol. Not only are there plenty more special symbols available on the dice that the Wrathmane is rolling when attacking, but also he has access to the elite keyword that will further enhance his ability to make use of this switch. Then again, we do have to remember that a state inflicting switch such as this one can only ever be triggered once, so this isn't going to be all that huge of a deal, but every little bit helps, especially when it comes to my favorite model. The typo on the Prime Warrior also gets corrected in this update. but also not in the way that I for one was expecting. I was again expecting the hollow special symbol to be turned into a solid special, but instead what happens is that actually that hollow special gets turned into a hollow success, which is way more lucrative for the Prime Warrior since she has access to a hollow success switch that inflicts automatic wounds upon the enemy, and I for one will much rather take that automatic wound triggerable switch rather than make sure that the frightened state goes through, since there is a decent likelihood of getting that frightened anyway. Then again, as we are going to be seeing, the automatic wound inflicting switches do take a small hit when it comes to their interaction with some abilities, but more on that later. All in all, the Prime Warrior has, from what I have heard, been really well received by the Northern Tribes players, so I would imagine that this is going to be making people even more eager to field her in their forces. The last update per se regards Irjavik's Cole. This one seems like a really bookkeepingly update to me, and I think that it reinforces the idea that I think is rather clear when it comes to companion type models anyway, and that is that companions are more or less additions to the character that they accompany, and I personally see them as a kind of like a unit that's joining a character leader, unlike the normal case where a character is joining a unit. But the companion model has very little agency in the game. They are more or less just upgrade cards for the character in question, and obviously there is some small battlefield geometry involved there, but that's really minor. So think of Cole as an upgrade card for Irjavik and you won't go too far wrong. But more on that duo hopefully the next week. And then we get to some of the hegemony units specifically called out in this FAQ. And let's start with the one that has had the most impact on the discussion by the Northern Tribes players, at least from what I have witnessed in my circles and in the Discord server, and that is Lady Telia. Lady Telia's headshot ability is pretty clear enough in the basic concept of what's happening, but the definite wording isn't, or the wording isn't all that definite, however, and this has raised questions on how the characters are supposed to defend against Lady Telia. The two questions and the two answers that we get here, I think, make it abundantly clear that when Lady Telia headshots a character in a unit, that character will defend with their own entire card as if they were a solo model. Yes, the ability itself on the card only references defense dice, but as you can see from these questions and answers, the automatic symbols and, for example, the elite keyword are applied from the card. So I'm going to be brave enough to say that this is a clear intention that if you have any other defensive abilities, you can indeed trigger them against Lady Telia. So somebody like Njord the Merciless, for example, should be able to make use of his Tattoo of the Blood Eagle to try and fend off Telia's murderous advances. Fight me on this one if you will, but I think this is clear enough. Next we have a couple of questions regarding the Ghent Dwarven Pioneers unit. First one is, whether or not automatic symbols from joint characters are added to their mortar ability, and it seems that they are not. And this, I think, is going to be a clear thing that we can reference later on when people are trying to figure out whether to add automatic symbols and such when using a special ability that acts as a type of attack. And the answer to that seems to be no. And I think this is excellent design and a good idea to do, since you don't have to, as a game designer, worry about all the potential abilities and character combinations as to regards, for example, to these automatic symbols. And it means that the player using the pioneers in this instance, for example, has to make the choice between using that empowered normal ranged attack or using the ability as is, and that's that. A second answer that the pioneers get is in regards to their train yourselves ability, and I think that this one also acts as a guide as to how to read the cards going forward. The Trench Yourselves has two different bonuses, and there has been some argument over whether you are supposed to fulfill the requirements mentioned before the first so that you can access the second. And the Pioneers aren't the only ones who have abilities like this. For example, the Bulwark's Charger's Folly also has several elements in it, and it wasn't clear to me from the first reading of the card whether you are supposed to get access to the second part of the ability if you don't fulfill the requirements of the first. But now I think we can pretty confidently say that going forward, the requirements, if they are baked into the text the way that the Pioneers and the Bulwarks, for example, have them, means that the requirement only affects the part of the ability immediately mentioned, and if there's a secondary effect, then that's always going to be active. Then again, I think we should not mistakenly think that if there is a requirement at the top of the ability in cursor text, that this doesn't then apply to the whole ability, but that's a whole nother instance or a whole nother use case anyway. Also, regarding the hegemony units, there was a question whether the bulwarks can taunt a enemy unit that's already engaged in combat, and when do the automata of Trabor move. And both of these answers are rules as written as far as I can see. A unit engaged in combat is not allowed to perform a charge, so unless they are, of course, a large unit, that is. So I would imagine that the taunt ability does work actually against large units, even if they are engaged in melee, but against others, no. And also, the way the automata are supposed to move is, I think, clearly enough written in Trabor's card, so I don't think there's a problem here. The interesting clarification that comes up while it is very rules as written is regarding the way the automata act with Trabor, and that is that you are not required to maintain any type of coherency. This is something that I keyed on immediately when reading the rules for the automata, and when we first started to play around with Trabor, is the fact that these token type parts of his profile, the automata, they offer tremendous freedom of movement, which is, yes, necessary for some of the abilities of these machines and how they are supposed to be leveraged. But at the same time, I found them to be extremely powerful as a way of, for example, stopping enemy units from charging. Because if and when you can shoot out a automata from near Trabor and then place it on the path of an enemy unit, it'll effectively stop them from charging, and that's quite powerful for such a disposable piece of equipment rather than a model. So it'll be interesting to see how important such plays are going to be going forward. For example, when it comes to the scenario presence of this heroic character. Then again, when we get the access to the War Machine unit, which name escapes me as of right now, that Trevor is going to be joining, then I think we are going to be seeing somewhat less automata going forward. Next up were two questions regarding fixing dice, but while I was able to copy and paste the questions and answers present here from the original document, the question and answer that are marked red here were rather quickly removed. But I have chosen to leave them here so that you know that this type of question was asked, it was answered, and then this entire entry was later deleted. And the deleted entry was about whether you need to re-roll the fixed dice if you perform a charge, for example, and get access to a re-roll. And I think that even though this original answer was worded poorly, I think the idea still would have been okay. That if I'm willing to spend, for example, a command token on my wise main to fix a die with my charging unit of orc hunters, it does feel somewhat problematic that then I would have to reroll that dice also if I choose to reroll my attack dice. But as you can see, the wording of fixed dice cannot be rerolled is incompatible with the next question. So if they had just worded this one, the dice you fixed doesn't have to be rerolled, for example, due to a charge attack provided reroll, then I think these two answers could have coexisted. As things stand off right now, I think the question still remains somewhat open, but I think the intention is rather evident from this now removed answer. So take that as you will. The second question that is still present in the current version of the FAQ document is whether you need to reroll a fixed dice if an opposing unit forces you to perform a reroll. And the answer to this question is basically yes. So forced upon the enemy rerolls seem to act as a soft counter for enemy fixing their attack dice, or any other dice for that matter. So it'll be interesting going forward to see how many units have access to the ability to force the opponent to reroll their dice. Oh, the poor evoker. I really love the model, I really love the background, but holy hell is it getting difficult to make good use of her. First question and answer is as to what happens when a augmented Spirit of Thermopleurus fielding unit charges an enemy unit and the enemy unit fails their resulting intimidating check and immediately gets demoralized and flees. Does the attacking unit fail effectively to complete its charge attack? And the answer is yes. This, I think, feels rather intuitive when it comes to the timing of the set ability, and this is something that I don't remember if I pointed out during the video on the evoker. But I was keenly aware of the fact that there is the situation where it's possible that you will break your enemy before landing a blow on them, and thus you will lose the ability to attack them. But then again, in that situation, you have already taken the ground you were attacking, and you have effectively dispatched the enemy unit without hitting it, so I don't think that's a huge problem. But what is a more meaningful problem, I think, is the next question. The question goes, how does the second alteration of the spell Summon Rock work? And if we read directly from the CP provided card, it reads, after resolving the attack, the spell gains the property remains active and adds the effect the target and all enemy units within 5 strides from it receive the slowed state at the beginning of their activation. I'm not disputing the answer that Corvus Belli is giving. That's the answer that they give, and they are the designers of this game. But it's not consistent with how the English language works in the wording that we have there on the left. In the text, Corvus Belli itself is referring to the unit that has had the Summon Rock cast on them as it, and then they are referring to the same single unit as there later on, when I think it's way more plausible to read that there as to mean all the units within 5 strides. But the way after this Q&A document the Summon the Rock ability is going to work, or this alteration is going to work, is that as long as the unit that was hit by the rock never activates, nobody gets slowed at all. And this is a really Boo and his clarification in my mind, because I was thinking that okay, Summon the Rock is really difficult to apply properly. Evoker is rather expensive for how extremely squishy and vulnerable she is. Spirit of Thermopleurus is not a universally applicable ability as is, but the Summon Rock has something going for it in this format. But now with the new ruling, I just don't think it's worth using. To be totally honest, spending all those points, all those activations, getting your evoker into place, and then at the end of the day, your opponent has all the keys in their hand whether this ability is going to have any effect. Just get the ice archers for the 25 points and shoot several units with slowing arrows. Inflict more damage while doing so, and don't lose a 25-point model to a simple attack. Poor evoker. Let's hope that she gets some type of update at some point, or at least that there is some good synergy between her and the rock troll when we get that unit, because as of right now I would rather take the Hersir, the Ice Archers, the Contender, Lotta, name any of our 25-point characters over Evoker in pretty much any case. Too bad, so sad, you're dead. Let's keep going. Okay, while we are at the subject of spellcasting, a few more questions and answers regarding them. The next question and answer are as to regards of whether a spellcaster can have more than one spell with duration active at any given time, and the answer to this is no. This makes a whole lot of sense, but it seems it was not clearly defined in the rules, so it's a good thing that we have an answer to that as of right now. The next one is also something that has caused quite a lot of discussion, and that is how to resolve spells that have as their effect a type of ranged attack mechanic, such as for example the Summon Rock or the Frostfire Herald's attack spell. Firstly, it's been made clear that these spells cannot make use of the ranged attack switches of the models employing them if they have any, and I think this is really intuitive, and if somebody had argued against me in a game that they're going to use a ranged attack switch from their basic ranged attack on their spell, I would have said no, come on, that's not how it's supposed to work. But I understand that there was ambiguity whether it was this way or that way, and it's good that it's now being cleared out. The second thing is whether a ranged attack type spell will whether a ranged attack type spell will cause a point of stress if it's used into a melee combat in which one of your friendly models is engaged in. And somewhat surprisingly, the answer is no. So if you shoot with your unit of pioneers into a melee, or throw a spear from Irjavik, that's scary and stressful. Okay, I understand. But then again, if you drop a giant rock on the combat or throw a fireball into it, that's cool, no problem. Okay, I suppose fair enough. It's a good thing that we know now, and this makes using these types of magic missiles more enticing when it comes to trying to solve a protracted close combat situation. The next question was regarding how to resolve Hinge, and apparently some people had been asking if you resolve for all the models with tins at the same time as a single roll question mark, but I think this was rather intuitive, if not downright clear by the rules, that every model with tinge makes a personal test and applies the effect. So that's what the answer reads. And then we get to Dispel, that has also been somewhat hotly debated of a topic. Dispel in the rules is said to be a form of blocking a spell, and this led to the question of, okay, when you block a spell or attempt to block a spell, you have to stress the spellcaster involved. Does dispelling carry the same price? And it's now been answered that no, it does not. Dispelling does not cause stress on the model applying it. But as already stated, dispelling is a form of blocking a spell, so you cannot do both a dispel attempt and a block spell attempt separately, but you have to choose one if you have access to both. And this is something that means, at least in my mind, that the dispel, at least the models with any type of better than a single black dice dispel, looking at you, Ormuk and Irjavik, are going to be more enticing choices or options for resisting a spell rather than trying to block it with your spellcaster in the traditional way, since first you will not be incurring any stress by doing so, and second you may have access to a better set of dice and also potentially the elite keyword. The next question was that can a elite spellcaster turn a hollow block from the tinge roll into a solid block to avoid receiving damage? And the answer was that no, since elite only applies to values or rolls indicated in your profile. And this clarification not only stops elite spellcasters from being able to avoid receiving tinge in some situations, but at the same time it further tips the balance of power towards dispelling over blocking, since a unit with the elite keyword, let's say Ormuk or Alvar Icebear, who also has access to dispel, can, from the way I read this, apply elite to their dispel rolls, since they are indeed something that come out straight from their profile, from their card. But a elite spellcaster shouldn't be able to apply elite to blocking a spell, since that's not a roll that comes from their card or their profile. So this is a interesting answer in this regard also. The next clarifications are about keywords, and first there are several about the scout ability. The first one was the theoretical situation that some people were evidently arguing could be out there, where you would not deploy scouts after the game had started, but rather immediately before, but you would then be able to perform a single action with them before the first game round started, and it's now been clear that that's not the case. So yeah, I think that's fair enough. Even though if there are any Rune Wars players out there, I understand in a way where this idea comes from. The second question is whether a unit that's coming into the battlefield via scout after the battle has started can perform a non-move action, because they have to suffer and sacrifice a action, and it has not been specified in the rules that it can be a move action. And since you can only perform a move and a other type of action, it can be read as that the unit has to sacrifice that other type of action and thus can only move. But now it's been cleared that the intention is that you are allowed to shoot if you are for example the pioneers or Telia, or for example use the tattoo of the snow leopard if you are the Tundra Marauders. The next one is quite a funky interaction, and kudos to whoever the people were who thought to ask of this, since I really didn't look at this rule at all, and didn't like I would be able to see the possibility of asking this question and actually getting the answer that we got. So kudos to you, whoever you are. So the question is that if during the deployment phase you deploy, in our example, I think the only relevant example as of right now, you deploy a unit of orc hunters on the battlefield, and then you choose to attach the Dark Master to them, granting them the ability to scout, what happens? And my boring answer would have been probably, well, then you just lose your ability to scout, because why did you should have joined the unit and the character before you chose to deploy the orc hunters, and now they're stuck on the field. But no, Corvus Belli chose the more fun route and said, okay, you get to pick up the hunters away from the battlefield, and now they are scouting with your Dark Master. I don't think this bait and switch is going to break the game, at least as of right now, since the opportunity cost present at attaching your Dark Master to a unit of orc hunters is so big that I don't think we are going to be seeing this as a mainstream strategy going forward anyway. But I think this may come up in the future more, and in some unexpected ways, since there are bound to be other characters that can combine with units to create situations like this going forward. So it'll be interesting to see how many, for example, Sienna units in the future are going to be starting the deployment by being placed on the battlefield and then shortly being removed because of a character that grants them the ability to ambush or scout. So that'll be interesting to see. Then again, not all that unthematic, not all that counterintuitive, so I'm totally fine as long as the game balance doesn't suffer as a result. Oh boy, this next one is probably the most highly publicized swing and a miss of the FAQ so far. So the first question is, does the unit with the keyword cover benefit from it, or only units that are adjacent to it? And the answer is that only units adjacent to the unit with cover can benefit from it. So, okay, I think this one was clearly enough, since the cover rule or the rules for cover state in a definite way that other units blah 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 blah. So I think that was pretty clear. But then again, when it comes to the movement rules, can your unit end its movement adjacent to a friendly unit? No, you cannot, since that's not allowed by the rules. So this means that cover is totally useless for your own guys, since you can't have a unit move into a contact with the cover providing unit in order to gain it. So you are effectively only granting that cover to enemy units. So if we look at cover as a way of providing a cheaper price point for your unit because they provide cover to enemy units that are engaging them, then okay, sure. But isn't it already so that your units provide cover to enemies that they are engaged with, regardless of whether they have this keyword when it comes to shooting into melee? So this seems somewhat half-baked, and I'm sure we will be returning to this subject in a future FAQ, hopefully sooner rather than later. Then some charge/assault related questions. Is there a restriction that you have to charge the closest enemy model when performing a charge? And the answer is no. Or rather, are you allowed to charge whatever model you want? And the answer is yes. And this, I think, is really important and really intuitive, since the geometry of where you place stuff in the battlefield is really important in Warcrow, and having more decision points and more ability to affect where things are positioned and how the resulting for example, pushback movements, pursuing and fleeing and other, well, not fleeing specifically, but other types of interactions between these units take place is going to be rather important. And if we had a situation where you would have to charge at the closest model, then this would give the defending or the defensively positioning player the agency in determining where the attacking unit will end up, and that doesn't seem all that intuitive nor all that good of a design choice anyway. I think this also clearly means that if and when we get large units in the future, they can charge through an enemy unit effectively to not only get behind them, but also to force them to take a willpower test or suffer a point of stress. And also they have to roll a defense roll against the stampeding large unit that's now trying to break through their ranks. And there's a potential even for that large unit to then start herding that defending unit towards the large unit's lines by pushing them back towards allied units. So I'm really looking forward to my future stone troll charging through some hapless enemies, given if they have enough movement, and then starting to push and bully them towards the rest of my forces who are sharpening their blades and axes, waiting for the rock troll to deliver their next victims in a package to their doorstep. And the next question was, are you allowed to charge or assault several enemy units at once? And the answer is no. And this is clear enough, and it's excellent that it's now been stated, so there needs to be no discussion over it. But obviously this means that somebody like Ormuk, for example, will be hard pressed to ever make good use of the Skullbreaker ability, since the decision to engage him with several units comes down to how your opponent chooses to play more than what you decide to do. Speaking of Ormuk, I asked in a QA mail earlier on whether you are allowed to perform the Skullbreaker attack in melee, even though it's a ranged attack, although obviously you should be able to, but also as to regards of that, does Skullbreaker cause stress on Ormuk because he's engaged in melee with units that he's attacking with a ranged attack, but I haven't gotten an answer in this FAQ, maybe in a future one someday. The next section is about what happens when there are no activations to be taken. The first question is that if all of the units are scouting or ambushing and they are not available and it's your turn to activate, what happens? And the answer is that you need to activate one of these units and effectively bring them to the battlefield. I think this stops the non-deploying, unintuitive and uninteractive non-deploying tactics from becoming a problem in the future, since you are forced to provide your opponent with some models to interact with each round. I don't know if in a scenario based and battlefield control based game like Warcrow, having all of your guys stay hidden most of the game would have been a successful strategy anyway, but regardless, it's not going to be a problem, hopefully, especially after this clarification. The next one, however, is a bit wanky, and I would say, as a veteran Infinity player, it feels CB through and through. And the question is that if it's your activation and you can't activate any units, what do you do now? And the answer is that you must pass your turn, and if this happens again the next turn, then the game ends immediately. And this feels way out there. Like, I don't know where this one came from, since doesn't this effectively mean that if, okay, I have all my units engaged in melee and they are full of stress so that they can't activate, okay, I pass my turn, and now if my opponent doesn't realize the danger or they fail to defuse the situation, it comes again my turn, and when I cannot activate anyone, because remember, you are not allowed to activate a unit that's full on stress, and you can't activate them to rest, the only other choice that they would have, because they are engaged in melee, the game just ends immediately. Plop! And that's it, you go down to counting your points. And this feels way out there, because this feels like in Infinity the retreat end game mechanic in some missions, where you can be confidently winning the game and your opponent is down down against the ropes, and then you kill too much of their stuff and the game ends, and you can actually end up losing as a result, because the scoring happens before you were ready for that. And this clarification, I feel, opens up the same possibility for Warcrow. I don't think it's going to be all that common that this occurs, but the fact that the possibility is out there seems really weird. I mean, if my opponent has played in a way and I have played in a way that has resulted in a situation where all their units are full of stress and engaged in combat, shouldn't this be a situation where I get to feast on my now hemmed in, tired and freaked out enemies, rather than them getting to bypass the rest of the battle and go straight into scoring? Weird one. Next up are some questions regarding controlling of objectives and demoralized units. Who is the control of objectives measured from? And the answer is from the leader. The rules quite clearly stipulate that all measurements are made from the unit leader unless otherwise stated, as is the case, for example, with ranged attacks and these types of things, or when you're targeting a unit with ranged attack, you don't have to have range to the leader, but in stuff like this, it's leader to objective, or in other things, leader to leader, unless otherwise specified. And then two questions on demoralized that felt so intuitive to me that I had never checked if the rules actually lay it out as this or like this. Can a demoralized unit control objectives, and can demoralized units use command skills? And to both the answer is no, and that's the only only correct answer I think that could have been given on these ones. Then we come to some more stress and morale related stuff. The question, can I shoot into melee to stress my own unit, has the answer yes, and I really don't know what this one is all about, to be totally honest. The rules clearly stipulate that if you shoot into a melee where you have your own models, you will have to suffer a point of stress for that, so okay, yeah, sure, that's the rules. And then can I stress during my activation if I know that the stress from the set activation will put me over the morale threshold? And the answer is yes, as long as you are below morale value when making the decision. When I first started playing Warcrow and I read this as communicated by, I think, Hobo in the Discord, I had to ask for clarification what this was referring to, but effectively this ruling means that since the stress gain from activating a unit for a second, third, and subsequent times during a round comes at the end of the set activation, it means that you can, for example, be at your morale threshold -1, choose to activate your unit knowing that it'll receive a point of stress at the end of the activation. Then you will activate that unit, and during that activation you choose to stress it, for example, by using a push modifier, and then at the end of the turn, oh no, now you get that extra point of stress from activating again and you are over the threshold. How clumsy of me. But this is, as per this answer, an intended interaction where you can push your unit effectively beyond its morale value in this instance, but you do have to suffer a willpower test as a result, and if you fail that test, your unit will be demoralized and they will flee. So it is a give and take, and by no means an automatic thing. Then again, if and when you are able to somehow push this single unit to even further, and you are more than 1 point atop your stress threshold, the same willpower test will clear all the excess stress. So as long as you can pass that test, no matter how much you are over your current morale value, you still get to come back to on par with it at the end of the successful willpower test. I have at times used, for example, my Wise main just for this, activating, let's say, a unit of Orc Hunters that's at its morale value -1, activate them, push for extra performance in the melee, and even if after that I lose the combat and get another point of stress, I would be 2 stress over the limit of the hunters, but as long as I can pass my willpower test with the reroll, then all is fine. And as you can imagine, I have been failing that rerollable willpower test more often than the calculations should predict, but hey, that's wargaming for you, right? Next are some questions regarding close combat, and the first one is about a feature that we have started to see slowly crop up in the units that we have access to, and that is a possibility for a unit triggering a switch to disengage from melee during the switch step. And the question simply is, do you still continue to resolve the combat even though a unit has disengaged from it? Via a switch ability, does damage still get dealt? And the answer is yes. You resolve the combat and you deal the damage as if the engagement was still happening. And this, I would argue, is the only right answer for the question. Since if this wasn't the case, then units like Tundra Marauders would be near broken, since they could disengage from melee to avoid damage quite reliably, and that would make them almost impossible to deal with in melee. So this makes sense. These units can make use of the switches to maneuver and, for example, stop from getting pushed back, but at the same time they cannot avoid incoming damage or the stress of losing a combat due to their switch abilities. Then there's a question of what happens if you have the ability to repeat a die and your opponent has a skill or ability that forces you to repeat a die. Who does theirs first? And the answer is that the player with the reroll ability on their unit does theirs first, and then comes the forced upon reroll from the opponent. And this means that, like already earlier discussed, abilities that force your opponent to reroll are going to be quite powerful, since they overrule in a way the reroll abilities that your opponent has access to. So that's important. Interestingly enough, the wording on the answer is that you resolve all your repetitions first, which can, if you put on a certain attitude, be seen as referring to the ability to sometimes reroll rerolls, which might be applicable with someone like Ormuk, for example, utilizing charge / bloodlust and Hare's narval tattoo combination, but I'm not going to be dying on the hill that you can, since this is worded like this, reroll rerolls in the future. Next up, if you are using an ability like the Tantra Marauder Snow Leopard Tattoo that allows you to engage with the enemy, can you engage with any model, or does it have to be the leader? This is one of the questions that I didn't think to ask, since I intuitively thought that okay, it has to be the leader, but okay, good, we now have the clarification that this truly is the case. Then the next one is something that has already been communicated earlier in an unofficial capacity. I think it was Hupo again who did it. And that is the fact that you can indeed lose a combat even if you wipe out the opponent, as long as the opponent dealt more wounds to you than vice versa. And I think this really makes a whole lot of sense. Stress in Warcrow, I think, is supposed to be a factor of, or combination of, both mental and physical fatigue and models or combatants being scared and sometimes feeling a bit demoralized. And if and when your unit wipes out an enemy, but you suffer tremendous casualties doing so, or you have to exert yourself to a point of exhaustion, it does make sense that you will then see the ill effects of such combat, even though your opponents now lie bloodied on the ground. So there's that. Then again, it's also important to remember that even though you lost a combat and received the stress as a result, you do get to perform that free movement action that you gain whenever you wipe out an enemy unit. And next we are going to be getting to the big one when it comes to the clarifications made on this document, and the one that probably has the most effect on my playing going forward and my estimation of the various unit and character combinations going forward. And that is, how do the different push modifiers mesh together? I have been working under the now as it seems false assumption that you combine the two modifiers into a single modifier that you can access with a single stress taken on your unit. But now it has been made clear that the intention is that you gain effectively access to two different modifiers, and you are allowed to trigger both, but that will cost 2 points of stress on your unit. And this is a real big deal. Firstly, it means that characters and units with weak push modifiers are going to have their relative value reduced, since you don't, let's say you have your contender in a unit that's capable of performing their own defensive push modifier. The contender's own push modifier defensively is only a single black dice added to the roll of the unit. So in what instance are you willing to take a point of stress for a mere black dice added to the result? okay, probably in a situation where you're about to get wiped out anyway, and you might as well, or maybe you have a powerful special based switch trigger that you want to access. But beyond those two situations, I don't think it's going to be worthwhile in most instances. And even if you have a character and unit combination that gives you access to two powerful push modifiers, even that instance, it's probably not going to be worthwhile triggering them both, usually, since the opportunity cost of the said stress gained through the push modifier is an entire activation by the said unit if you have the time, turns at your hands to do so. So if we, for example, have a unit of Orc Battles Guard joined by the Wise Main, yes, now you have access to a pretty powerful set of two defensive push modifiers when you get attacked, but if you trigger those two, then that's potentially two activations from that round that your Battle Scarred plus Wise Main combo doesn't get to make or don't get to make, so I would be really hesitant to use that ability going forward. So all in all, I think this impacts the stock of especially characters joining units if and when those characters have weak push modifiers and or they are joining a unit that has a competent push modifier of their own already. Then again, I do understand from the game design standpoint this decision, since it does make it so that it's less likely that the players are able to combine the units and characters released into some truly unhinged combinations for little to no opportunity cost. So I understand this change or this clarification, but it's going to have a high impact for sure. Then the second question on this page, who decides the direction of the pushback after the unit is defeated, I suppose. And the answer is the winning unit decides. And this is slightly curious, since rules as written says that the defeated unit must move to place as much distance between itself and the victorious unit as possible. And usually with units performing positioning maneuvers around their leader and so forth, there aren't going to be a whole lot of choice of where to go if you are strictly aiming to position the pushed back leader as far away from the victorious leader as possible. But this question and answer seem to suggest that the victor simply gets to say, hey, defeated guys, you are going that way, and then that's the way that movement happens. I think this is a good way to play when it comes to the flow of the game. You aren't stuck there wondering, hey, what's the geometry of these circle bases over here, what's the direction that I need to go that I get as far as possible, but rather the victor gets to say, okay, go that way, and that's what happens. Obviously still respecting the geometry of the situation and the possible directions that are out there. So in my opinion, this somewhat overrides the rules as written, but I really don't mind. I just want to play the game the way it's intended to be played, and I want to play it the same way as my opponent is playing. So that's well and truly good enough for me. The next questions and answers, I think, illustrate a clear intention from Corvus Belli's part on how melee combat is supposed to work in Warcrow. As the first question is that if units are no longer in base-to-base contact when casualties are removed, can the losing unit still be rejected? I think this is the wrong word. It's supposed to be pushed back. because there is no rejecting in the game of Warcrow? And the answer is yes. This is again something that in a way supplants or maybe augments the way the rules as written work, since I had to double check this one, but the rules do say that the pushback only happens if the units are still engaged at that stage of the close combat, and the definition of engaged in the rules is being in base-to-base contact with an enemy unit. But this answer suggests that it's the intention of the designers that the units are still considered engaged even if removal of casualties has led to a situation where they're physically no longer touching one another. And this is reinforced by the next question. If after finishing a combat only the leaders remain and they are distanced from one another, do we have to perform the positioning maneuvers? And the answer is yes. And this means that this, I think, reinforces the idea that casualties are not a way of disengaging in Warcrow, but rather the combat goes on until one unit disengages from it by breaking or moving away, and that's, I think, clear enough. This interaction between removing casualties and disengaging has been something that I have found to be problematic when playing the game rules as written, since it has led in several instances to a situation where a unit attacked and losing guys is able to take such models away that the engagement is broken. They can then prevent themselves from being pushed back, and then they can countercharge the unit that just attacked them just by the virtue of losing so many of their models, and that doesn't feel very intuitive. So it's really nice that this has now been cleared out as to what it means or how it's supposed to be played. And the last question is simply, is there a limit to the distance that a model can move as a result of positioning maneuvers? And the answer is no. And this is very much in line with the fact that in Warcrow, the flow of the game is such that the models other than the leader are more or less markers, and they are used to generate the geometry of the battlefield, but you don't need to concern yourself with measuring with any of them, and I really like this design choice. It's clearly enough defined as of right now, at least, how this is supposed to work, and it's really quick when you're playing the game, and I really love this. So nothing bad for me to say over here. The next one falls somewhat to the category of, okay. Since the question has been posted, what happens if I eliminate an enemy unit with switches? Do we continue the combat? And the answer is that if a unit is wiped out due to switches, you advance directly to the resolution step of the role. And the way I read this with the rulebook by my side is that if a unit wipes out the other via using the switches, you still proceed to the resolution part of the combat where damage gets dealt, and it's possible that the unit that just wiped out its enemy still suffers damage or effects as a result. But then again, if a attacking unit that gets to apply its switches first destroys its enemy unit with the said switches, then the defending unit loses the possibility of using switches against the attacking unit. I don't know what this ruling is based upon, but hey, okay, if this is how it's supposed to work, then this is how we're going to be playing it, and that's that. The next one is simply about displays, switches, and how they work, and it's more or less what we already discussed earlier when it came to the Tundra Marauders. If a unit disengages via a displacement switch, the combat is still resolved, so you have to move your models first, but then the damage follows them around and some of them effectively end up dead at their new location anyway. And on the subject of switches that deal wounds, at what point are automatic wounds from switches inflicted? And this is important when it comes to skills such as medic that allow you to withstand potentially some of these or even all of these hits. When do you trigger this, and do you get to trigger abilities such as this several times during the damage infliction steps of the close combat? And it's now been ruled that all the automatic wounds that are inflicted via switches are applied as a one clump of wounds, and then you get to apply abilities such as medic to reduce that total, and then the standard damage that comes at the resolution of the combat is another batch of damage, and you get to apply medic and skills like this or abilities like this yet again. And this is a tad harder on the procedural side of actually resolving the combat as you're playing. But when it comes to the game design side of things, I think this is quite clear why this is so and what's the intention around this one. Abilities like medic are supposed to be the antidote towards automatic wound infliction type abilities, just in the way that or in a counter to the way that automatic wounds are a cure for high defense. So there's that. And I like it. You need to have your papers and scissors and rocks in your game, and I'm totally fine with abilities like medic being the rock to the scissors that is automatic wound inflicting switches, even though that's something that many of our Northern Tribes units are actually to a lesser or greater extent relying on. And then some ranged attacks related stuff. I'm planning on doing a beginner's guide on ranged attacks at some point, so these are good answers to have in that regard also. The first one is something again that I didn't think of mainly because I don't think this has come up in our games so far. But if a hostile game element such as the wild mord map in some of the missions is engaged with an enemy unit and you shoot into that melee against that hostile neutral, quote-unquote neutral unit, does that cause a point of stress on the engaged enemy unit? And the answer is yes. This makes sense if you are engaging something and then somebody shoots at that thing and you are in the immediate vicinity. It really doesn't matter who's shooting. That should be pretty unnerving an experience and a dangerous experience anyway. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And then the next question is that what happens if a unit that's charging has all its standard unit members wiped out via stand and fire, and then the character is left alone. Officer character obviously is left alone, and in this instance it's declared or decreed that you have to complete the charge with the charge movement value of your standard unit, and if you fail to reach the enemy, then you or the character's movement value that is, and if you fail to reach the enemy, then the charge has just failed. And this can in some situations feel a bit weird. Usually I don't think there should be a whole lot of a difference between the charge distance of the unit and the accompanying character, but obviously there are outliers there. Then again, I think it's reasonable that now that the character would be attacking with their own profile anyway, that they have to reach it there make the distance, reach the enemy with their own profile also. And it's not too hard to imagine a situation where an officer is leading their squad on a charge and his squad members get wiped out via enemy fire, and he gets caught up in all that, or tries to save his comrades, or there's a heroic moment where he kisses the forehead of his second in command as he lay dying on his arms, or something very cinematic like this. So I'm totally fine with this clarification also. Fine and fine. Always remember that when I'm talking like this, I'm talking as a single hobbyist, simple Lindworm traveler. I'm not raising myself to a position of authority. I'm just saying, calling the things like I see and how I feel about them, and that's really all that there is. Regarding hold and shoot, that I think I just referred to stand as fire and fire, but anyway, can you hold and shoot once the enemy is in melee so that you can gain the bonuses of being in the melee if you have any? And the answer is no. And yeah, sure, it wouldn't make much of a sense to shoot in melee against the unit that's just charging or attacking you. That's just not going to fly, so this makes a whole lot of sense. And can a hold and shoot unit use its passive ranged attack related abilities even though it does not gain the ability to apply its switches? And the answer is yes, and I think this is also clear enough. I don't think there's any reason to think of this in any other way. I think the hierarchy or the structure of the game is such in other situations like this also, like for example in an opportunity attack, that even though you aren't allowed to trigger switches, you are allowed to apply your passive skills to those types of attacks also. So this one sure does check out. Then some character related questions. If a character activates to join a unit during the turn or the round, can they still benefit from no one gets left behind at the end of the turn if the unit itself didn't activate, since the character does not bring their activation token with them when they join a unit? And the answer is yes. And I think this is pretty much rules as written anyway, since it's clearly stated that the character discards the activation token when they join a unit that does not have one, and the no one gets left behind is triggered by not having an activation token, not by not having any of the elements of the now formed unit have activated during the game round. So this is pretty clear enough from where I stand at least. And then what happens if a character has a ranged attack bonus and the unit that they join does not have a ranged attack? They don't gain a ranged attack because of this, but rather the addition is wasted, and this again makes a whole lot of sense, so nothing more to see here really. These next two are quite quick and intuitive. Is a character who has joined a unit considered a unit inside a unit? And no. It's pretty clear to me that the intention of the game designers is that when a character joins a unit, you just get the bonuses from the card, but the unit remains a unit for all intents and purposes, and that's it. If you, for example, join Alborg to a unit of skin changers, it is a Varang unit for the purposes of the Varg and the Crow, since it's just a Varang skin changer unit with some additional abilities granted to them by a character who has joined them, and that's that. And if a support character has an ability that has a range attached to it and they are joining a unit, who do you measure the range from? And as already discussed earlier, you always measure from the leader of the unit unless otherwise stated, and that's the case here also. And these two are, I think, quite clear when it comes to how the rules are written. At least that's how I read them in my limited ability. When a character leaves a unit, does the unit also receive an activation token? No, because the rules don't say that they do, so they don't, and that's that. and a character leaving their unit cannot move through any models of the unit as they do so, and hence I, for example, have at times talked about well, especially when it comes to the wise main, who as a support character you have more power to decide where you deploy them in the unit or where you place them in combat, for example. You need to keep an eye out for a position from which you can then move away from if that becomes necessary. This is usually a moot point when it comes to the officer type characters, since they have to be so centrally placed that disengaging or detaching them from their own unit isn't going to be all that easy, especially if there is a melee engagement going on. Next up are some questions regarding states, and the first one being that can disarmed and vulnerable states be applied during the activation, during which they are inflicted upon the enemy, and the answer in short terms is it depends on the situation. If you are inflicting the set states via switch abilities, like for example is the case when an orc hunter unit is attacking their enemies, the vulnerable state inflicted therein happens at the switches step. So you have already lost the chance to apply vulnerable for that combat round, and you have to reap the benefits of that later on. But then again, if you have, for example, the champion of Embersic or a unit that she has joined, thanks to her duelist ability, they are inflicting the vulnerable state at the beginning of the combat, and thus they are able to reap its benefits later on when they make their attack roll and their opponent makes the defense roll, and hence in that instance you get to apply that. So you need to be careful about the timing of these states to make sure that you play this interaction right. And the next one is how does the slowed state affect no one gets left behind phase or step. And it's declared here or clarified here that if you move as a result of no one gets left behind and you are slowed, yes, you have to sacrifice the second part of your movement, but you get to move your first movement value and then discard the slowed state. At the same time, the other choice that you have access to at no one gets left behind step is to not to move, but rather to perform the rest action, which clears all your states, gets rid of all of your stress, and allows you to move just for that second value of your movement. So that effectively means that your no one gets left behind unit now has two half moves available to them and the ability to get rid of the slowed state. So the first thing to note here should probably be that if your unit has any stress, just rest instead, and you get to make small move, remove all the stress. You get to remove the slowed and all other negative states that are affecting you. But then again, if there are no other things to consider, then just pick the move or the rest depending on whether your first or second movement value is better. And a couple of more questions regarding the slowed state. If a demoralized unit with the slowed state is fleeing, does it apply the effects of the set state? And the answer is no, since fleeing is not considered a standard movement action. This also means that as the unit is not declaring a move per se, it will not shed the state, but rather it will flee, and if and when it rejoins the battle, then you still have to contend with the slowed state also. And the next question is simply about how the rules are written, so I don't see what's the point behind this one, but what happens if a unit with the slowed state performs a charge, and as per the rulebook, your unit gets to perform its charge, but it has to subtract 4 strides from its charge movement. Do also note that performing a successful charge this way does not allow you to shed the slowed state, while making a assault move with just your first movement value would potentially get you into combat and also would allow you to remove the slowed state at the end of your activation. And then there's a question and answer that's supposed to be about the frightened state, I assume. So if a unit is suffering from the frightened state, but they also have the ability to reroll their willpower, which is applied first, and it said that first you have to apply the frightened state, and then you can apply your own reroll. And this means that characters and other rules that allow you to reroll your willpower dice is even more powerful than before, since they are a type of soft counter to being frightened, which, to be honest, makes a lot of sense. And lastly, we get to some terrain related questions. What happens if two traps activate at the same time? The player with the initiative gets to decide the order in which the traps activate. It's good that this has been laid out. In most situations, it is the case that the player with the initiative decides the order in which things happen, but it's not always the case in some instances. For example, in the case of attacking, the order of operations is fixed in many cases. And then there is a question on how does rocket terrain work if it does not have any type of unit attached to the rule, and this is something that the rule book quite explicitly sets. If there is no unit called out, then the terrain is rocket for everyone. I think that when it comes to terrain, the more important stuff is not what's said here, but what's not said in here. I am really surprised that there is no clarification of how forests and unit coherency is supposed to work. That's something that we have been discussing quite a lot in our local group. Since the coherency rules require that you must have in order to keep coherency with your unit, you have to have all the models in the unit be within 2 strides and have line of sight to the unit leader. And in forests, as they block line of sight into and through, it's impossible to fulfill this line of sight requirement. So I was hoping that we would get some type of answer on how to resolve this issue, but surprisingly enough, that's not the case. I was also left wanting to know more about, for example, the order of re-rolling in close combat situations or combat situations generally. If there are both players have the ability to re-roll their own dice, for example. Let's say we have a unit that's charging and a unit that's defending, and the defender has the ability to re-roll. Let's say my orc hunters charge bulwarks. Which happens first? Do I trigger the re-roll from my charge, or does the hegemony player have to declare their re-roll related to the charger's folly, for example? But hey, this is the first FAQ. And this all leads us nicely to the last slide of this episode. Now we have all the CP provided answers covered. At least I think I have them all covered on this video. And I all in all feel in true honesty and in my heart of hearts that the Warcrow FAQ 1.0 is a good start. We got answers to many of the important questions that we were wondering, some answers that we didn't know that we were needing, and obviously some answers were still left waiting for the future episodes and future FAQ documents. But if CP follows through and posts these FAQs with any type of regularity, I trust we will be getting there soon enough. I personally, in my humble opinion, feel that the Warcrow rules as a whole are really great, and I really love the game and the way it flows. And the small nitpickings that aren't entirely working at the moment, forests, cover, keyword, and such things, they are at the end really small parts of the whole equation, and I'm sure we will be getting answers sooner than later. And until the meantime, just let's be friendly with the people we are playing with and find the answers together and enjoy this great game and great world. If and when I got something blatantly wrong, please let me know in the comments section. Let's not go into trying to litigate rules court in the comment section, but obviously if there are clear mistakes or misinterpretations, let me know. But be polite to one another if there are several commenters out there. Phew, this was a really long episode. It's time to go and rest my voice. So safe travels to you everyone, and hope to see you again soon.